This is a good question. Somebody asked me this one. I'm happy someone addressed this. Right now, it seems like I don't advocate overloading the shortened position for muscle. So hopefully this terminology is pretty useful and you know what I'm talking about for most of you guys. But again, we're using the bicep as an example. Well, let's use all the heads of the tricep as an example, not the long head, just so keep it simple. So this would be a fully lengthened tricep, fully flexed elbow. This would be a fully shortened tricep. This would be somewhere in the mid-range. So same for every muscle group, literally just the muscle itself when it's fully lengthened, whatever that range is, and when it's fully contracted and fully shortened. That's the range. So when I'm talking lengthened, middle, shortened, that's what we're talking about. It is accurate to say right now, I don't train muscles to full failure based on load in the shortened range. And the reason being, as of right now, I don't think it's a valuable use of volume. So when a muscle is in a fully shortened or fully contracted position where all the contractile tissue is overlapped, basically it's not a strong position. This is pretty proven by physiology, meaning how much, if I literally measured how much force can that muscle produce on a bone to bone. So if it's literally pulling as hard as it can on the bone, you measured how much force it can produce, it's not capable of producing very much. Where muscles are much stronger in the lengthened and in the mid-range is where they seem to be the strongest. That's separate from mechanics. So that's separate from how mechanics changes, how that muscle crosses over a joint and things like that. That's just the muscle fibers on their own. It seems like weakest when they're short, strongest somewhere in the middle, and pretty damn strong, but maybe not quite as strong in that lengthened position as well too. So meaning if, and again, when I say strong, is if you could put little scales on the end of the bone, when they pull as hard as they possibly can within those various positions, you're gonna get the biggest pull, the biggest number on that scale in that mid-range and those lengthened ranges. So what does it have to do with muscle building? When that number is the highest, is that when obviously that muscle's producing the most force, or if we like to talk about in the muscle building world, the most tension, which you could argue that force, that tension seems to be the strongest stimulus for what's going to lead to the ability for your body to hypertrophy and put on muscle. So if I'm going to advocate spending my precious training volume on something, it's going to be in the places where my body can produce the most force and the most tension. Whereas if I overload the shortened position, I know bone to bone, I'm not producing this massive number, but I'm still probably using some energy system stuff. I'm still probably fatiguing, if there is such a thing, fatiguing or really challenging my brain side, which could, one, at best, just be a waste of volume, or again, I would doubt it's adequate stimulus to really put on a significant amount of tissue. Or two, at worst, it could be fatiguing me in some way that I can't produce as strong contractions in that mid and lengthened range, and I'm actually inhibiting and making those exercises more useless. So I love training in the shortened range, just not to fatigue. I like just having, there's smarter people that I've worked with than me, that it seems like my current opinion on this, which is not it's not written in stone anywhere, I don't have it on any tablets in my house, is that you just have to have ownership of those shortened ranges. So I think it's important to go there and have good quality contractions there. That's pretty much where all of my activations occur, but trained completely non-fatiguing, ideally with no load or very, very little load, just focusing on a very, very quality contraction. And then expend all my load where my body can have that highest bone-to-bone pull. So in that mid-range and that lengthened range, that's where I'm going to put all my volume at, where I think, honestly, that's where I can have, hopefully, it would seem to be the strongest stimulus that could potentially lead to the ability to produce hypertrophy, obviously, if you're recovering from that. So that's why, yes, at the moment, I don't really advocate training there to full failure, muscular fatigue and failure. I just like to use it purely for activations at this point in time. And the rare exception, so the person said, well, why do you do like leg extensions sometimes? There are some exercises. I'm not an advocate, one, of training that position if the same exercise also trains with a better load the mid and lengthen ranges. So that's good to address. So if I'm using, like, let's say a cable press down, which I think obviously as I press down with the cable, right here, as that cable's the furthest from my elbow joint, that's where I'm going to have the most load. So it's really matching what my body can produce. I might train it all the way to full extension, so actually completely lock out my elbow, completely shorten that tricep. But that cable is going to be closer to my elbow at that point in time, so it's going to be less load. So I would, one, still use exercises that train possibly through that mid and lengthen range and include the short range, as long as, most importantly, it's overloading that mid and lengthen range. And I might train exercises where there's a great trade out for stability. So again, a leg extension example. One, a good leg extension overloads kind of the mid-range of the quad still and should get lighter as you get to that shortened position. But even if it's still overloading that shortened position, it's the most stable, the most everything else out of the equation quad exercise there is. So meaning even with the leg press, where my spine and my hips are locked in stone, I'm still using all the other muscles around. I'm using all the muscles around my hips and around my ankles and stuff like that. There's still more to manage. Where if I'm in a leg extension, the only thing working is going to be quads. So I might still incorporate something like that, because it's such a good opportunity to just absolutely trash just the quads, like no other exercise can isolate or do. So really good question there. I'm glad somebody asked that.